Welcome back to another edition of Real Spiritual Talk Radio. I am your host, Lamont Gates, once again bringing you the world of faith, metaphysicality, and spirituality. Today, my guest had a near-death experience that shook the core of her disbelief. Joining me today, ladies and gentlemen, is near-death experiencer Louisa Peck. Louisa, welcome to Real Spiritual Talk Radio.
Good to be here.
Glad to have you here. Now, Louisa, as I just mentioned at the top of the show, prior to your near-death experience, you were a avowed atheist. You were vehement in your atheism. Talk to us about the root of that and how that affected your worldview prior to having your near-death experience.
I'd say, no question, the root of that was my father. My father had been kind of forced to accept the Catholic Church starting when he was a little boy. He lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and his family was Catholic, and they had to go to church all the time. And then he had to be an altar boy. And as is often the case, the priest had a predilection for little boys and would try to catch the altar boys on the way out and give them kisses. And the others were faster than my dad. My dad was kind of overweight and not a real physical guy. So he said he was always the last one, and he'd always get caught and he'd get this big wet kiss on his mouth. And then, another time he was the only altar boy who showed up. So he had to do the stuff with the holy water and the wine and everything. And he dropped something, I forget what. And he said the priest was livid at him. And so those two things just really soured him. Then he got a full scholarship to Harvard, and he was like, that stuff was BS. And I'm so glad that I got this ticket out of there. And so starting from as early as I can remember, he just taught me God is something people made up because they're afraid of dying, because they don't understand natural phenomena, and because they want something to turn to in comfort. So they made up this kind of Santa Claus thing, and it's not real. So really, at the time I stopped believing in Santa Claus, I also was sure there was no God either. And then I went to school and just kind of read everything I could and studied everything I could to sort of cement those views. So by the time I finished college, I had written multiple papers to prove there was no God. And I also, I could meet you and be like, oh, it's so nice to meet you. And then you could say, yeah, and I go to church, and I'd just be like, okay, we're done. Because I just felt like it was like you said, I can't wait to see what Santa brings me. I would just be like, that's pathetic that you believe that. And that's truly how I identified.
But that all changed at some point in your life. And I want to now get into your near-death experience, or rather, what caused your near-death experience to occur.
Okay. So also, like my father, I was kind of a tense and performance-oriented person and began to drink. And then nobody knows if it's genetics or behavior, but I had both, I think, because I look like my dad. And I followed his example that wine was just the way to relax. So I did not get sober. And so, I guess it's hard to tell things in order, but I was only a few years into my alcoholism when my NDE happened. So I managed to finish college with good grades. I can remember taking exams when I'm seeing double. I can remember taking exams when I was just about to hurl. But I would show up and I would take them and I would finish writing the papers and I would make myself do what I had to do. And then afterwards, I just moved to New York City and I was like, okay, I'm done with all the work. I'm just going to party. And I want to go. I don't know if you've ever even heard of Studio 54, but there were these nightclubs that were like larger than life. And I liked them, but they were all kind of glitzy and I don't know, mainstream. I like not so much pop music as new wave, which was kind of not cutting edge in 1980, but you know what I'm saying? It was a kind of music that I liked. So went to this nightclub called the Peppermint Lounge, and that was what it's all about. Should I just keep rolling? Because that's where it happened. Keep rolling. Okay.
Yes, please do.
I was morally very backward in those days. I had a boyfriend who had graduated before me, who was in New Mexico, who I was going to marry, supposed to marry. And then I had a secret boyfriend. And then I was breaking up with one so I could get with the other. And meanwhile, I was going out with the secret boyfriend's best friend because he was a coke dealer. And it was supposed to be just friendship, but it was kind of fuzzy about whether it was just friendship. Anyway, we did all the coke he brought, which was a lot. And I was having a fabulous time. And I had a ton of insecurity. And I always felt like if I could just feel cool enough, I would overcome that. It just seemed to me like I was just always this close from being cool enough to not be riddled with self-doubt and self-loathing and all the things that I suffered from all the time, because of my mother was not the most nurturing mother in the world. So anyway, I started coming down. We ran out. I started coming down, and I could just feel kind of, all my Louisa's that I didn't like to be kind of coming up on me. And I was like, let's buy some more. So we got together all the cash we had. And there was this kind of shady guy in that nightclub. And I just remember him having on like all beige. That's what I remember, all beige leisure suit. And that wasn't, by the 80s, that was not cool anymore. That was maybe cool in the 70s, but anyway, that's what he had on. And he was like, yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. And so we took it and we rubbed it on our gums and it numbed our gums. And so we bought the little baggie and then he disappeared. And we started snorting it and it did nothing. It did more nothing. My friend, who was kind of a coke connoisseur, he just threw down his bill and he was like, this is not doing anything for me. And so my thought was, well, didn't it numb our gums? So if I do the whole pile, maybe I'll get a little bit high. So I snorted the whole pile. I did not get high because it was not cocaine. And I would not know this until many years later when I got sober and somebody gave me the missing piece, because in AA, there's also a lot of Narcotics Anonymous people mixed in. And a lot of my friends had been drug dealers. And I just never forget the one who told me we used to cut cocaine with lidocaine in the 80s. And it sounds to me like you were sold pure lidocaine. So lidocaine is so toxic when you ingest it systemically, because just like it'll numb your skin or something like that, it just interrupts all the nervous communication within your body. And if you get it in your bloodstream in enough quantities, it'll stop your heart, it'll stop your breathing, it'll just stop everything. People have committed suicide by eating a tube of lidocaine that is like 5% lidocaine. And I snorted this whole pile. So anyway, what happened? I remember saying I was going to go to the bathroom, and I left, and I started to notice tunnel vision. I started to notice those speckles that you get around the sides when you're going to faint. But I wasn't scared because I just was like, okay, we'll see where this goes. And then when I was in line for the bathroom, it started feeling like awfully dark in there. Couldn't see well. I didn't realize my heart rate was going down, down, down as the lidocaine took effect. Then when I finally was in the stall, I saw that I couldn't read any of the writing in there. It was like, you know how graffiti, you sort of try to read it, but it's not really letters. It all looked like that. And I knew it can't all be like that. And I thought something is wrong. And there seemed to be no air because my pulse was dropping so low that even when I tried to take deep breaths, if your heart rate's down to 30, it's not gonna get oxygen to your brain fast enough. So I came out and I was trying to breathe really hard. I found my date and I said, there's no air in here. There's no air. I get kind of freaked out. And I remember, and he was like, just calm down, calm down. And he took me to the bar. I told the bartender she's having a hard time. And he said, here, just have a glass of water. I did not want a glass of water, but I just was a people pleaser. So I wanted to make them happy. So I took the water and I took a sip. And that's when I left my body. So should I continue?
And that's where the mystery of the otherworldly realm comes in. So why don't you tell us what it was that you actually experienced when you left your body?
So I had I felt something hit my chin. I felt like first that maybe I had collapsed and hit my chin on the bar because it felt like an impact. But what it did was, like in Popeye or something like that, when you punch somebody and they fly up in the air, that's what happened to me. I got this strike and I went up like I'd been shot up out of a cannon. And I had a very brief sense of leaving behind what I thought of as all that nonsense. And all that nonsense was the nightclub, but it was also Manhattan, but it was also my earthly life and my life as Louisa. And I just kind of felt like, phew, I'm glad that's over with, because that was silly. And that was my last thought of this life until the very, very end. So I was shooting up in the air. I left behind everything, and I was just in the clear blue sky with all the air I could want. And I sensed that under me was the ocean going all the way to the horizon in all directions. So just these two elements, air and water. And so I was shooting up, and I had this wonderful, delicious feeling that I could do a back bend and do a swan dive, kind of like Esther Williams or somebody like that. And so I thought, I'm going to try it. So I did a back bend, and it worked perfectly. And I arched over. I couldn't do this ever, but anyway. And then I was diving straight down towards the water. And then I had a thought, wow, I'm like 200, 300 feet above the water. Isn't it like concrete when you hit it from this high? And instead of being scared, I just kind of felt like, isn't it like concrete when you hit it, and I just thought, well, we'll see, because you don't have fear on the other side. It serves no purpose. So anyway, shot down into the water, went down really deep, and I could see these beautiful bubbles rising toward the surface. And when I looked toward the surface, it was all dappley and beautiful. And I thought, wow, that's a long way up. How am I going to get there? Next thing I know, I'm there. Then I see the shore is way far away. And I think, what is that? I want to be there. Next thing I know, I'm wading out of the water. Like there's no swimming. I'm just surface, want to be there, and I'm wading out. And it was a beach, but it was not a beautiful tropical beach. It was kind of a more like barnacle-y, rocky beach. And there was down the ways, there was a mesa, looked like a mesa, or a sea stack is what we call them here, when the ocean has eroded away everything except kind of a pillar of land. And on that was an old house, pretty far away. But I thought, that house, it has to do with me. I've gotta get there. So next thing I know, I'm there, but I'm not at the house. I'm down at the bottom of the mesa, which is now a big pile of boulders, and they're covered with this gross, rotten seaweed, something really repulsive, kind of greenish, brown, slimy, yucky. And I mean, I can't remember a smell, but I just remember being utterly repulsed. And then I had a thought like, yeah, but I'm strong and capable, and I'm getting to that house, and I can climb through this. So I climbed past it, and I climbed up, and I reached the doorway of the house, except that I somehow lost my body in the process. So I'd had a body when I was wading out of the waves, but when I got to the door sill, it was like I was this far from the ground. I was just right above the surface. But I also had a thought like, this is a real bummer, but I'm not going to let it stop me. I'm still going in there. So the instant I crossed the threshold, a bunch of things happened. I crossed the threshold, and I understood that this was where all my ancestors had gone, that we had all gone through this house, right? And I could see, because I was so close to the wood, which is, by the way, kind of another element, that it had been worn to like this. I could see the grooves of the wood, but I could also see it almost gets like velvety when enough people walk on it. And I'm like, that's because so many of us have come this way that we've worn the wood to this kind of soft, velvety texture. I could sense them around me. I could not see them. The house appeared to be empty, but I could sense them filled with joy that they were going to get to be with me soon. And the one that I sensed most distinctly was the one that I never met either of my grandfathers, but one of them died even before I was born. And he was my dad's dad. I had no reason to single him out because I'd never met him. And he was from a photograph, and my mom wouldn't let my dad keep his photographs out of his family. So they were in the closet, and I could see my granddad's picture there. That's the only place I knew him from. But this was his energy and his excitement to see me. And I was excited to see them. I did not give a crap about my ancestors, about extended family. We were an alcoholic family, so I didn't even know my cousins. But here I was super excited about it. And I knew there was supposed to be a chair in the middle of the living room. And I knew that all my ancestors loved to sit there and stare out the horizon. So I was like, this is no fair. Where's the chair? What and how am I going to see out the window to look at the sunset, to look at the ocean? I didn't really know it was a sunset. I just thought to look at the ocean. I want to see it. As soon as I thought I want to see it, something grabbed me by where my sternum would have been if I'd had a body, by that sense of, you kind of know where your heart is, right? Grabbed me by the sternum/heart and pulled me across the floor. I was not willing this. It was just happening. I was moving across the floor, and I had a sense of, whoa! And then I went up and over the windowsill and out, and I was flying over the ocean. And I was just elated, filled with joy. The sun was setting in front of me, and the water in front of me, the sun made a path across the water, and that's what I was zooming over. And I actually just came down to zoom over it, and the sky was all light up on all these colors, and it was so gorgeous that then I had another earthly thought, and I thought, wait a minute, isn't this a little too perfect? This is kind of how things are in dreams. And then I asked, is this real? And then someone answered me. I was not expecting an answer, because when you wonder something, normally nobody answers. But this voice that was very kind of resonant within me, it said, more real than anything back there, meaning back in Earth. And the sun was getting bigger and bigger. And I was getting closer and closer. So I wondered, I wonder if I'm gonna vaporize when I hit the sun. Again, no fear. And then instead I passed through this filament, and I was in the sun, and that's where I encountered the light. So it was just as soon as I passed through that filament, nothing but light. Could not see anything. I didn't hear anything. I just felt the love soaking. I was a sponge for love, and I just was soaking it up, and it was in the light. And I felt like finally, because it felt like life was all a battle to be good enough. Life was all a battle to be worthy and lovable. And I was always falling short. And here I was finally completely loved. Then I became aware of some kind of being holding me like a little infant, and seemed to me kind of sitting on the ground and holding me and just pouring love into me. You're so loved. You're so loved. And I just wanted to stay like that forever. I loved the parent, and I remember just feeling yes, this is what I want. And then the parent said, you can't stay. You're not done yet. And the light cut to black, just from total surrounding light to blackness, and this sense of dropping. And I was, for just an instant, well, actually, first I was furious, then I was terrified. So I was furious when I heard or sensed that, you can't stay. You're not done. I felt like, no. And became really, really angry and wanted to throw a tantrum and kick the parent in the shins. I had that sense that you have when you're little, that I can be more powerful than you think. And I'm going to show you, and I'm going to make you let me stay here. But then I felt one more thing from the parent, which was case closed, honey, case closed. And that's when I felt the dropping and the terror, because I didn't know what was happening. And then I began to see against that black, almost like curtain now, I could see little stick figures in chalk, and they were kind of dancing around and doing cartwheels, and they had playground stuff all in chalk, a little teeter-totter, a little swing set, and they were going on these toys, and they were saying little half rhymes. I don't actually remember them, but it was like, how many hippos make a hopscotch? How many fiddles make a flim-flam? And they were saying things playfully, but I just had a sense of, like, I used to watch Saturday morning cartoons and just would zone out forever. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to zone out forever on these until I can go back to the light. I had a sense that, like, that the parent had given me this to entertain me until I could go back to the light, because I knew I was going to go back. But then one of the stick figures came forward, and his head filled in like a plate instead of a chalk circle, and he starts getting in my way, and he's going saying the same rhyme, but not as happy, not as playful. He's saying, how many fingers, what is your name? At first I'm just kind of like, dude, I can't see. And then I realized he's talking to me. And that's kind of the first bummer. And then I realized he wants me to do that thing where you kind of burp out noises that are in code so that he can understand, because we can't understand each other telepathically. And he thinks he's he, and he thinks I'm me. He thinks we're separate. And I just realized that I was back in the meat puppet, which is how I thought of it. And I was totally bummed, just so bummed. And everything seemed so stupid and primitive and like just going backwards. And I often describe it as if somebody said, Lamont, you're going to get to go to kindergarten for 50 years. Won't that be great? All the construction paper and blocks you could ask for. But, you've seen something more exciting. I felt like I couldn't go back, but I said my name, I said how many fingers, and then I gradually realized I was lying on the floor, and I was in a big puddle of water. I actually had thought that they had thrown water on me, but that was my sweat. I don't know why I was alive. But I did not go to the hospital. Why did I not go to the hospital? We all went up and we went and sat on a bench outside, and I started smoking a cigarette again, and bartender came up and explained that I'd been gone for 3 minutes and he had been doing CPR the whole time. And my date said, that I looked so dead, was so blue, looked so different. He said, I didn't just look blue, I looked different, like a dead person. And that he wanted the guy to just stop and just cover, because he just didn't want to see. I guess CPR was kind of violent, he didn't want to see that. And I had a grand mal seizure before my cardiac arrest. Anyway, I didn't thank him. I was embarrassed that he'd had his mouth on my mouth, because I was so mature at 22. And then I said, what are we doing? He said, we're waiting for the ambulance. I'm like, cool. And then I'm like, who's it for? And he's like, it's for you. You were dead. And then I just thought of my parents. I thought of how much I hate hospitals. I thought of everything. And so I just said, please, I don't want to go in the ambulance. I don't want to go to the hospital. And so there were all these taxis right there in front of the nightclub. So he just grabbed my hand. He'd also gotten in a little trouble for cocaine at college, and he was a high school teacher. So he just grabbed my hand, and we got in the taxi and we took off, and everybody chased after and banged on the back of the taxi, because they had seen what they had seen. I had not seen it, and we just drove away.
Well, they saw what they saw, but certainly you saw what you saw while you were having this near-death experience. I have a few questions about that before we move on. It sounds like you had an out-of-body experience where you shot upwards, as you stated, into some water, came out of the water. Eventually, you make it to this house where you see your ancestors and family members. Yes. Yes. So my question for you is, while you were in this house, did you have any communication with any of these relatives? I know you said you saw what appeared to be your great-grandfather, but did anyone communicate with you? Did you communicate with them?
No, except for exchange of love. I could feel their presence. It's a weird thing, this idea of feeling people's energy, feeling their presence. I could feel their presence. I could feel their anticipation, and I could feel their love, and especially this one grandfather's. But there were no messages exchanged besides that. I guess there was a slight message that I was in the right place, that this was a good thing that was happening.
You also stated that once you left that particular area, you went back upwards again. You eventually heard a voice that said to you, because you were questioning yourself, is this a dream or not? You heard this voice that said, this is more real than where you came from, or something to that effect. Was that voice telepathic or was it audible?
It was completely telepathic. And that seemed to me very natural. It's not words, it's not in any language, it is the thought itself. The thought itself more real than anything else. The thought itself more real than anything back there. It's direct. You don't need words, you just get the whole I gotcha idea.
And that's pretty common with most near-death experiencers when they are in communication with something. Many of them state that the information comes to them telepathically.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it clarified to you that this experience was much more real, I'm assuming, than the earthly life that you're living and I'm living right now. But in your view, did this feel more real than your earthly life?
I left that out. That when he said that, I didn't think of it as a he then. I thought of it as when the voice said that, I kind of had to go, you're right. Like, that's what I remember feeling. I don't think I answered, but I felt, when somebody says something and it's true, and you're like, good point, that's kind of how I felt.
So in other words, you were in agreement with this voice that, yes, this is much more hyper real than my earthly life.
Yeah, because I could just feel what was happening on many more levels than we do now. What's happening now is, things are hitting our eyeballs, sound waves are going in, and it's all getting translated into nerve impulses in the brain. And what are we? 1/10 of a second behind actual reality, because it's just a big hologram. It's just a big hologram of our senses that synthesize things and make a little story. And there it was just direct energy, and I was of it and I was in it.
You then stated that you were in the light, and this light was giving you love that you could never have imagined to exist in the earthly realm. My next question to you is, what or who do you believe this light was or is?
I can only tell you what I felt then was I just didn't question it. I was so stoked. I was so happy to be finally in this state of, it felt, sometimes I'll describe it as when you're lying on the beach and you're totally relaxed and the sun is on your skin, only it went through me. It was all through my being, my thoughts, my essence. Everything was subsumed with this light. What I'd say now it was what is on the other side when we get closer to source. My father, in all of his atheistic wisdom and scientificness, had taught me that every bit of energy, the energy with which I'm conversing with you, the energy that's running our laptops, it all comes from the sun. Every bit of energy on earth comes from the sun. And the exception to that would be wind stuff, tide stuff, and geothermal. But everything we eat, the energy from the sun. So every thought we have is energy from the sun. So that, when we would be looking at the sun, he would say, that is our source. And so for me, that was God.
You did use the word parent at some point.
Yeah, the parent was the one that was holding me. Yeah, so there was the light, and then there was the parent. And the parent, spoiler, the parent is my guardian angel who's with me now and talks to me lots. We can get to that later, I hope.
So this light was God, and this entity holding you that you referred to as parent
God
was
energy, with God energy. I mean, God, it's like one ray of sun from the sun. That is sunlight. But could you call that the sun? No. My little experience of the light was like that much of God.
gotcha. And this parent that was holding you or cradling you, you referred to that as your guardian angel. Did it
Now,
did okay, did it didn't respond, did it communicate with you, identifying itself at the time?
no, it just said, you are so loved. You are so loved. And it was for me. It was not like we do this for everybody. Oh, here's the you're so loved part. No, it was kind of like, I've known you since before you even knew yourself, and I love you. And yeah, that was also amazing. But the parent was an entity, and that was the one that had spoken to me.
Many near-death experiencers talk about after their experience, what they would describe as having after effects. For example, many of them would come back feeling a lack of fear of death. They would come back with higher empathy rates or higher empathy levels. They would have some bout of precognition. I know in your case there was premonition. Talk to us a little bit about your after effects and these premonitions that you had concerning
Well,
your own family.
but Lamont, before I do that, can I preface it by saying that I flunked my NDE? I flunked F.
What do you mean by that?
Because I came back, and I the next day when I was alone, I thought about what happened. I knew it had been more real than this. I thought about the voice saying more real than anything. I thought about the love. I thought about the light. But this was 1982. There was no such word as NDE. There was no such concept as near-death experience. And the only thing I knew was church. And again, my idea of church was completely shaped by my father. And so for me, if I assented that this had been real, I would have to go to frickin' church. I would have to change everything about me. So me with my little Pat Benatar hairdo and my little, like mini skirts and cigarettes and punk wannabe stuff, all that would have to go away. And I saw myself wearing like this kind of brown plaid dress and holding a Bible and going around with churchy girls. And I was just like, I can't. And so I knew I was betraying myself, but I just said, I can't. That had to have been a brain phenomenon. It had to have been some kind of hypoxia because my heart stopped. I don't know why my heart stopped, but I thought from cocaine overdose. So I shoved it all aside. So 10 years later, this is the premonition of death. And I still don't understand it fully, but my family is kind of a little screwed up. So there's a lot of triangulation. So it was my mother who called me and told me that my brother was going to be a parent. And as soon as she said, I don't want to say the person's name. I'll say as soon as she said Jenny is pregnant, I just got this darkness and this just sense of like, oh, and I knew that the baby was going to die. I didn't know when, but what I really knew was the sadness that was going to just completely engulf my brother. I understood that this thing was going to happen, baby was going to die, and my brother was going to be engulfed in this grief, and grief like beyond measure. And that's what I could sense, I could feel. So then what do? You go like, oh, don't be silly. Why are you thinking these silly things? Everything's going to be great. It's going to be great. And so then I just go around trying to tell myself it's going to be great, try not to think about it. And I didn't want to jinx it. I didn't know it. Then my mom would say, oh, they're going to go buy some baby clothes today. They're going to go. And every time she'd tell me something was going, every time she'd bring it up, again would come this wave of the sadness and the loss when the baby died. And then it built to this kind of crescendo. I went out with my brother, which was unusual. We didn't see each other much, but my sister and my brother and I all went out to Happy Teriyaki. And I just thought, happy teriyaki. That's so ironic because he's going to be so deeply in grief. And I just felt like such a liar. And I couldn't say anything because what I would have to say is, your son is going to die. And I don't know when. I don't know how. Maybe it'll be SIDS. Maybe it'll be, something in childbirth. Maybe it'll be a heart defect. I don't know what it is. I just know he's going to die and you're going to plunge into the deepest grief imaginable. And we said goodbye. He's getting into his car. I'm getting in my car. I feel like it's my last chance to warn him. But I had no specifics. I had nothing helpful. And so I just prayed really hard that it wasn't true. And he drove away. But oh God, do I remember that moment. It's a tough one to know something, but be completely powerless to help, And then the next morning he called and he said the baby died because his whole umbilical cord was fanned out over the amniotic sac. Instead of making a cord, all the blood vessels had fanned out over the amniotic sac. So he was doomed. There was no way when that water broke, he wasn't going to start bleeding to death. But they didn't know that. So when the water broke, they just went to the hospital in the normal time that you would. I tell about the whole story in my book.
Speaking of your book, I know when did you write this book?
I just finished it in August.
Okay.
3 years I wrote it.
Right. Why don't you tell us the title of the book and where we can actually find it? I know you.
I have one right here. But, if you guys think that I'm some glitzy, I don't make much money off this, but I want people to know my story. I was showing them this before. Like, this is how homemade things are. Here's the cover of the book. It's a painting I did. And I didn't have the skills to Photoshop stuff. So this is paper.
Wow. By hand, huh?
This is a little photograph.
Is that Isaac Newton there?
Yeah, that's Isaac Newton. Yeah. He was my previous hero. And then this is supposed to represent my angel talking to me. And I'm torn between this is what I think is real, this is what's happening, and I don't know. So anyway, that's how homemade this book is. And it's on Amazon, and it is called Die Hard Atheist: From NDE Denier to Full-On Woo-Woo Against My Will. And I use the term woo-woo the same way, I might say that I'm a drunk or a former drunk in AA. It's like I can use that word and I know what it means to be a sober drunk, and I know what it means to be a full-on woo-woo. It was hard because of my upbringing.
Well, listen, you had an image there of Isaac Newton, who was a great scientist. He was also a man of faith. I do believe personally that we can balance science and spirituality rationally together, and that they can peacefully coexist the way we should be all peacefully coexisting as humans.
Exactly. And Einstein, same thing.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I mean, they shouldn't be at odds. And all we have to really realize is that we don't understand the power of love. We don't know how powerful it is. It's not just, oxytocin or endorphins, or that it is energy and it is goodness.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I have a little thing that I say goodness, kindness, forgiveness, love, and that's just my power comes from that.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating indeed. Well, Louisa, I want to thank you for coming on Real Spiritual Talk Radio and sharing with us your absolutely wonderful account.
It was fun.
Yes,
Thank
it was.
you a lot for asking me.
Very informative. Ladies and gentlemen, Louisa Peck.